In 2018, archaeologists sifting through the ash of a 14,400-year-old fireplace in the Black Desert of northeastern Jordan found something they didn't expect. Breadcrumbs. Not metaphorical breadcrumbs. Actual charred fragments of flatbread made from wild barley, einkorn wheat, and the ground roots of an aquatic plant. Baked on hot stones by hunter-gatherers who had no farms, no fields, and no domesticated grain. This discovery rewrote what we thought we knew about bread. Because until that moment, the assumption had always been that bread came after farming. You grow grain, then you make bread. But bread came first. By more than 4,000 years. The thing sitting on your kitchen counter right now has a history that begins before agriculture, before cities, before writing. This is that story. To understand what bread actually is, you have to understand the problem it solved. For most of human prehistory, eating was exhausting. Hunter-gatherers spent the majority of their waking hours finding food, chasing animals, digging roots, picking berries. What they found, they ate immediately. There was almost no way to store calories for later. Wild grains, the ancestors of wheat and barley, grew across the Middle East and were essentially inedible as they came off the plant. The outer husk was tough and fibrous. The raw grain inside was hard, starchy, and nearly impossible to digest without processing. So for tens of thousands of years, humans largely ignored them. Then someone discovered that grinding grain between stones and mixing it with water created a paste that, when dropped on a hot stone near a fire, became something else entirely. Something with a crust. Something that held together. Something that could be picked up and carried, eaten hours later, shared with someone who hadn't been at the fire. This was revolutionary, not because it tasted good, though it probably didn't, at least not at first, but because it was the first portable, storable, shareable calorie-dense food humans had ever made. It was the beginning of food as something you could plan around. The Natufian culture of the Eastern Mediterranean, the people who left those breadcrumbs in Jordan, weren't farmers. They were hunter-gatherers who had begun to embrace a more settled lifestyle, choosing to stay in one place rather than follow food sources across the landscape. Bread may have actually driven that transition rather than followed it. If you can make a calorie-dense portable food from wild grains growing near your camp, you have a reason to stay near those grain sources. And if you stay long enough, you start to notice that the grains around your camp grow better when you clear competing plants. And then you start to wonder if you could make them grow where they don't naturally occur. Following the Neolithic domestication of cereals in the Fertile Crescent around 10,000 years ago, bread-making intensified, enabling surplus production that facilitated population growth, settlement, and early urbanization in Mesopotamia and the Nile Valley. In other words, bread didn't come from farming. Farming may have come from bread. The next great leap happened in ancient Egypt. Around 2600 BCE, the Egyptians were the first civilization to intentionally use yeast for leavening, creating lighter, risen bread and eventually developing over 50 different varieties. This was not a planned experiment. It was almost certainly an accident. Someone left a grain paste too long in the warm Egyptian air. Wild yeast from the environment settled on it. The paste began to ferment and expand. When it was baked, instead of a flat hard disk, out came something lighter, softer, with a completely different texture and flavor. The Egyptians didn't just adopt leavened bread. They industrialised it. Archaeological evidence from ancient Egyptian bakeries shows production at a scale that could feed thousands of workers, most famously the builders of the pyramids at Giza, who were paid partly in bread and beer. Bread had become the currency of labor. From Egypt, leavened bread spread to Greece, then Rome, then across Europe. Baking became a respected profession in the Roman Empire around 300 BCE, leading to the establishment of the first bakers' guild, the Pastorum, in 168 BCE. By medieval Europe, bread was so central to daily life that it functioned almost as a unit of account. Lords paid workers in bread. Monasteries were judged by the quality of their loaves. The word lord itself derives from the Old English flatword, literally bread guardian. The word lady comes from hlefdige, bread kneader.
The entire social hierarchy of medieval Europe was embedded in the language of bread.
Then came the Industrial Revolution, and with it, the thing that changed bread more than anything since Egyptian leavening. Otto Friedrich Rohwedder invented the bread slicing machine in 1912 and began using it commercially in 1928. The phrase, "the greatest thing since sliced bread," was coined almost immediately because pre-sliced bread genuinely was, for ordinary consumers in 1928, a remarkable convenience. But sliced bread required bread that could survive being sliced, which meant softer, more uniform loaves with a longer shelf life. Which led to the addition of preservatives. Which led to the removal of the complex fermentation processes that gave traditional bread its flavor and nutritional density. The loaf that emerged from that process, soft, white, pre-sliced, lasting weeks on a shelf, is what most of the world now calls bread. It is almost unrecognizable from the charred flatbread in that Jordanian fireplace. 14,000 years ago, a Natufian hunter-gatherer ground wild grain on a stone, mixed it with water, and dropped the paste on a hot rock near a fire. That person had no idea they were inventing anything. They were solving a problem: how to get more usable calories out of the wild grain growing near their camp. The fact that this solution would eventually feed the pyramid builders of Egypt, sustain the Roman Empire, structure the social hierarchy of medieval Europe, and end up as the loaf in your kitchen cupboard, none of that was visible from where they were standing. Everything around you was made before you. Most of it started with someone trying to solve a much smaller problem than the one they ended up solving. Before bread though, before grain, before fire, before the Natufians, there was something even more fundamental that changed how humans stored and preserved food entirely. Something invented in the 1800s that killed an entire industry nobody remembers anymore. That story is next.